Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in AP English and our World of Ideas lectures. We are now in lecture number 31. This is the introduction to Unit 6, Culture. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net in the AP folder, where we have already given 30 lectures. Unit 1, we discussed government as a concept with several essays, including Lao Tzu and Machiavelli's Prince. In Unit 2, we met justice and we talked to a Declaration of Independence, Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail and other titles. In Unit 3, we did conversations and essays on wealth. We talked about Adam Smith. We talked about Marx's Communist Manifesto. In Unit 4, we talked about concepts of mind. We looked, for example, at Plato's cave allegory. We looked at issues that are surrounding Freud, interpretation of dreams. And then in Unit 5, just the one that we just finished, we were messing around with readings from nature, and we read some controversial thinkers. Darwin was there for us, as well as Francis Bacon, and then some more modern kinds of writings. And now we turn to Unit 6, Culture, which technically, of course, you could argue we've been studying the whole time. And really, I mean, to go back to our comments about Ken Wilber's 4 quadrants theory, remember that upper right quadrant is the physiological world, the upper left quadrant is the world of the mind, the lower left quadrant for Wilber is the world of culture, and of course the lower right, the world of economics, continuation of notion of culture and systems and the like. When we normally have started these units, I've referred to Mortimer Adler and the great Centopicon, 102 great ideas there that he will explicate. Culture is not one of those because so many of those are somehow a part of culture. His chapter on civilization or whatever. I'm not going to read from Adler this time. I am interested, though, in just going to Jacobus himself. Let's do paragraph outlining as part of our annotative work. And as we've done in the past, let's just listen to the prose of Jacobus as he introduces us to this concept of culture. Here, we're going to see a number of writers that will be exciting, I think, challenging for us. He says, to begin on page 472, the contemporary concept of culture encompasses the laws, rituals, values, beliefs, and intellectual and artistic endeavors of a society. However, in the past, culture was not considered an overarching description of all the components of a society. Instead, the idea of culture was often juxtaposed with the idea of civilization. In ancient Rome, the word cultura was linked with the concepts of knowledge and philosophy, while civis denoted political citizenship in Rome and thus a sense of superiority to the surrounding non-Roman societies. During the Enlightenment, thinkers such as Rousseau, who obviously we met in Unit 1, right, argued for a romantic concept of culture as representing the natural and creative potential of human endeavor, whereas civilization was viewed as representing the artificial and mechanical forces of technology that ultimately resulted in man's alienation from his fellow man. You'll remember the opening line, man is born free but is everywhere in chains, right? However, for many social critics, by the late 19th and early 20th century, the idea of culture had come to include the combination of social, ideological, political, and economic forces that shaped and defined a given society or group. Out of Room 303, a number of our students have graduated high school and gone on to university to take degrees in anthropology and applied cultural studies. Obviously, we spend a lot of time in 303 making the argument that we are the stories we tell, we retell, the stories we accept, the stories we reject. And so it makes sense to study not just the cultures, but the ones who tell those stories, right, and translate those stories, and of course accept or reject those stories. Paragraph 2. Perhaps because culture is necessarily a human creation, anthropologists and historians have long examined their own and other cultures for clues to the nature of individual and collective human identities. In fact, it's often been through exposure to different cultures that humans have come to a clearer understanding of their own traditions and philosophies. For example, Michel de Montaigne, the dates 1533 to 1592, one of the most influential of the Renaissance thinkers, was deeply interested in cultures other than that of his native France. Although he himself did not travel extensively, he read widely and studied reports of the contemporary expeditions to North and South America. According to Montaigne, The customs that prevail in any nation or region should be treated as acceptable and moral for that culture, even if they seem unacceptable for others. This is what sometimes would later be called cultural relativism. He held that moral judgments were a matter of opinion only and resisted judging culture solely on the customs and mores of his own society. The question of whether or not it's possible to be objective and what the concept of objectivity means is central to the study of culture. As the readings in this section attest, virtually all great travelers, historians, anthropologists, and other students of culture judge and describe foreign societies based on, of course, their own cultural standards. However, the urge to understand the traits that are unique to, as well as those that are shared among the different societies of the world, propels them onward in their studies. In the process, we all learn more about ourselves and the people with whom we share our world. There's a legitimate reason for why we should be studying cultures that are somehow foreign to us, different from our own. Now we'll get into the readings. Let's go ahead and begin with Herodotus, 473. Herodotus traveled widely in the classical world and lived at a time when Greece was at its zenith. He was first published around 425 BC. Think about 399 BC is the death of Socrates, to give you a sense of where we are. For him, its civilization was the crowning glory of all humankind. In commenting on people who lived in lands that figured in his history of the Persian Wars, Herodotus usually relied on his own personal experiences and observations. He traveled. His records, he records his impressions of Egyptian culture with an eye toward both its similarities with Greek culture, particularly in the names of the gods, and its differences. Some of those differences will be remarkable. He is painstaking in his efforts to communicate the details of Egyptian culture, ranging from sexual practices and methods of embalming to treatment of animals, sacred and otherwise. And there's going to be some controversial stuff, even from a writer of so long ago as Herodotus. Let's go to Devaka next. Devaka was an early 16th century Spaniard shipwrecked on the coast of Texas at a time when no European had set foot in the region. During his 8-year adventure, filled with harrowing escapes from death and extraordinary accomplishments, he lived among several different tribes of Native Americans. Although he was not always treated well, in some cases he was threatened with death or slavery, he found ways to make himself useful enough that his Native American hosts were willing to feed and house him. Apart from being considered a faith healer, right, he also managed to become a trader, a traveler among various tribes. In his Relation, Devaka systematically recounts the behavior of Native Americans with whom he lived. He describes them physically and explains the ways they gather food, house themselves, conduct warfare. In his thoroughness, he does resemble Herodotus. Interestingly, he spent time with some of the Native American tribes that Ruth Benedict discusses in her reflections on the Zuni and Pueblo culture. Now to continue, Ruth Benedict, this will be our third text we'll study. Ruth Benedict's interests center on the ideas involved in shaping cultures. While she was a graduate student in anthropology at Columbia University, she developed her own concepts regarding the psychological makeup of culture, borrowing the terms Apollonian and Dionysian from Friedrich Nietzsche in an essay that we will study later in World of Ideas. She applied them to various peoples within and outside Pueblo culture. For example, she saw the Pueblo Zuni as Apollonian, intellectual, cool, reserved, and the Quetzal of the Northwest, whom her teacher Frank Borges had studied, as Dionysian, quick-tempered and temperate, given to grand passion. Her application of these terms related more to psychology than to religion. She used Apollonian and Dionysian to describe the apparent mental states of people in the culture she studied. For example, she spent a considerable amount of time studying the Dobe people in the Pacific, which convinced her that their menial state was neither Apollonian nor Dionysian. Instead, she felt that they displayed qualities associated with schizophrenia. Not all students of culture apply methods of psychology in the field, but it is one of Benedict's special strengths. From Benedict, we move to Margaret Mead, very famous Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead, a student of both Boas as well as Benedict, learned 7 languages in order to communicate with people and cultures in the South Pacific, both before and after World War II. Women, Sex, and Sin is a study of attitudes toward women in the culture of the Manus, a people living in the largest of the Admiralty Islands, northwest of what is today Papua New Guinea. she reveals a fascinating development in the culture caused largely by the wartime interaction of Manu's men with men from Australia and with films from the United States. As she tells us, the men returned to the island of Manus and purposely restructured their society. Few anthropologists have the opportunity that Mead had to study the effects of such an overwhelming change in social behavior. In the process, however, she examines the effects of change on the women themselves and notes that underneath, much has remained the same. We should point out, by the way, that all of the people that we're going to read, including Mead, there are a whole lot of people that are going to see them as very controversial and are going to have some problems with maybe some of the things they either said or represented. Finally, Clifford Kurtz. Kurtz reflects on the difficulty of ever being able to report on a culture from the quote-unquote native's point of view. He establishes relatively quickly that such a venture is essentially impossible. However, he attempts to resolve the problem of how we can know another culture by suggesting that it's possible to study the symbolic forms, quote-unquote, of a culture. It's, quote, words, images, institutions, behaviors, end quote. He supports his theory by referring to three cultures that he studied closely: Javanese, Balinese, and Moroccan. Each of these is different, and each is instructive. In each case, Kurtz discusses some key words in the local language in an effort to demonstrate the specificity of the symbolic forms he studied. His efforts offer us a method by which we can study not only other cultures, but also our own. And now to finish Jacobus's observations. These essays exemplify the range of thought regarding the possibility of understanding other cultures. At the same time, they offer insight into the ways in which people lived and continue to live, reminding us that we are part of a larger community of humanity whose diverse cultures are in a constant state of interaction and change. In addition, the awareness these writers provide can help us understand ourselves as much as we hope to understand others. And with that in mind, we now are going to turn to the first of our authors, the great Greek writer Herodotus. And we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges of studying another culture without somehow just assuming that our culture is better than that other culture. All right, so come on back and we'll go to work with the unit on culture. Thank you. I hope you're learning something through this study.